Elijah Coleman didn't come for attention. He came to reclaim a truth that had been buried beneath gold plaques and forgotten names. When the 84-year-old stepped into Whitmore Financial with nothing but a canvas bag and an old man's steadiness, the polished lobby paused, not out of respect, but confusion. They saw a stranger. He saw the place he once built. What happens when a man no one remembers walks into the building he founded and quietly demands the world remember? The marble floors gleamed under the morning sun, but they dulled slightly when an old man pushed open the door with a canvas bag and quiet certainty. The doorman hadn't even looked up. Most people didn't when someone like Elijah Coleman entered. He was wearing a long brown coat with cuffs frayed from decades of winter wear and shoes whose soles had thinned but not yet surrendered. The canvas bag on his shoulder sagged with the weight of something that seemed heavier than its size would suggest. Inside, it was warm and quiet, too quiet for a bank lobby that claimed to be Riverstone's heartbeat. Elijah paused just past the threshold. The air carried a faint scent of polished brass and seasonal cinnamon, pre-Thanksgiving decoration week. Garlands curled around pillars like polite reminders of tradition. Framed portraits lined the far wall, all men in gray suits, their eyes fixed forward, unsmiling. Beneath one of them, half obscured by a newly installed frame, was the old logo, Coleman Trust. Most didn't notice it. Elijah did. This wasn't the first time Elijah Coleman had walked into a bank, just the first time in decades that no one knew he belonged. A soft ticking came from the grandfather clock near the exit. Its wooden casing shined with reverence. Elijah glanced at it briefly, then straightened the collar of his coat, taking in the space like a man measuring something he once built with his own hands. Each detail struck him like memory: the grooves in the column base, the indent in the floor where the counter used to stand, the faint scratch on the marble that only he could still see. Stephen Bright spotted him just as Elijah passed the second row of customer seats. Stephen's boots clicked once against the tile as he stepped forward, alert but casual, the way a man moves when he's convinced he's in the right. "Sir?" Stephen's tone was clipped. "This area is for clients. You'll need to step back to the waiting zone." Elijah didn't stop. He glanced at Stephen, calmly, almost apologetically. His eyes held no fear, but no arrogance either. Just steadiness. The kind that unnerves people who rely on being louder. Stephen took another step. "I said, this section isn't for you." Elijah turned slightly. His eyes drifted past Stephen to a leather chair in the corner, half hidden beneath a new coat rack. "Funny," he said, voice barely louder than a whisper. "That used to be my chair." He didn't wait for a response. He walked past Stephen with the grace of someone who had stopped asking for permission a long time ago. At the front desk, Heather Monroe looked up from her screen. She had watched the interaction unfold with quiet curiosity. She was used to Stephen's posturing, but this old man hadn't flinched. Now, as he reached the counter, something about him caught her attention. The way he looked at the building, not with confusion but with memory. Her eyes fell to the bag hanging from his shoulder. Just beneath the flap, for the briefest moment she saw it. Faded lettering, barely visible, Coleman Trust, 1951. She blinked, uncertain whether to speak or simply keep watching. She chose the latter. Elijah placed both hands gently on the counter's edge. The marble was cold. He stood still, letting the silence settle like dust on polished glass. For the first time all morning, the lobby went silent. Not from routine, but from not knowing what would happen next. The nameplate on the manager's desk read, "Martin Hale." Elijah hadn't seen his own name on a wall like that in over 70 years. The hum of the lobby faded under a hush that didn't quite settle, more like a collective intake of breath held too long. Footsteps echoed on the tile, deliberate and slow, as Elijah walked toward the front of the bank. A few heads turned. Others tried not to stare but couldn't help it. Behind the counter, Heather moved papers from one tray to another, her hands automatic. But her eyes didn't leave him. Above the welcome desk hung an oversized oil painting, sepia-toned, imposing. The Whitmore family, generations deep, posed with serious eyes and pale knuckles clutching ledgers. Each face seemed etched with permanence, as if daring time to question their right to the wall. Below it, the modern logo of Whitmore Financial shimmered faintly on the glass. But Elijah's gaze lingered on the faded imprint just visible beneath the gloss, curved letters that once read, "Coleman Trust." He stopped beside the manager's desk. Martin Hale looked up from his computer, brows lifting in polite confusion. Tailored navy suit, lapel pin from Dartmouth, not a wrinkle out of place. He rose slowly, offering a corporate smile. Warmth practiced, professional. "Good morning, sir. Can I help you?" Elijah didn't speak right away. He let the space fill with his presence, quiet but unyielding. "This bank," he said finally, voice level, "wasn't always called Whitmore. I named it Coleman Trust." Murmurs sparked like a static charge. A woman in line adjusted her purse. Someone near the ATM glanced over and whispered something to their companion. Stephen Bright, from his position by the security desk, stiffened. He stepped closer, his fingers brushing the radio at his hip. "Sir," Stephen said, "if you keep disturbing the lobby, I'll have to ask you to step outside or call for assistance." "I'm not disturbing anything," Elijah replied, eyes never leaving Martin's. "I'm simply correcting the sign." Martin's smile didn't falter, but something in his posture tightened. "Mr. Elijah Coleman." Martin nodded once, slow and measured, like addressing someone who'd just wandered into the wrong meeting. "Mr. Coleman, I believe there's been some misunderstanding. This institution has operated as Whitmore Financial since 1974. Perhaps you're recalling a different branch or a different time. I'm not mistaken." Elijah's hand went to the canvas bag. He unsnapped the flap, each motion unhurried, deliberate. From within, he pulled out a leather-bound ledger, worn, edges curled with age, gold embossed on the cover, faded but still legible. "Coleman Trust, 1951. Heather froze mid-motion, her hand hovering above a stack of deposit slips. Her professor's words echoed in her memory, uninvited. "Banks aren't built on concrete. They're built on memory, and memory is fragile." She moved closer, pretending to organize receipts, her eyes fixed on the ledger. Elijah placed the book on the desk. The weight of it made a soft, definitive thud. "I built this place," he said, his voice like quiet thunder. "Then they took it, erased my name, and told everyone I never existed." No one moved. Even Stephen held back. This statement didn't carry rage. It carried something colder. Older. Martin looked at the book. His jaw worked once, subtly. He leaned forward, fingers brushing the edge of the ledger, but not opening it. For a fraction of a second, something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition? Or fear? Some truths are loud. Others rest quietly between yellowed pages and ink that refuses to fade. The overhead lights in the private meeting room gave off a sterile glow, softened only slightly by the fake wood paneling and the dusty fern in the corner. The table looked clean but carried faint impressions of elbows, coffee rings, and quiet decisions made behind closed doors. A framed quote hung slightly crooked on the far wall. "Integrity is the foundation of wealth." Elijah sat still, the brown ledger open before him. Across the table, Martin Hale leaned forward, the corner of his mouth twitching every few seconds. He had stopped trying to hide it. His polished demeanor hadn't cracked, exactly, but it had begun to warp around the edges, like paper too close to heat. Elijah said nothing. He let the document speak. Martin turned each page with increasing haste. Incorporation forms from 1951 bearing a different bank name, clippings from the Charleston Herald with Elijah's photograph, dark suit, sharp eyes, a younger version of the man now seated silently across from him. There were signatures, embossed seals, newspaper headlines that once celebrated a, quote, bold and historic financial step led by an unexpected pioneer. Heather Monroe stood quietly in the corner of the room. She hadn't been asked to remain, but no one had dismissed her either. Her eyes moved from Martin's twitching hands to the documents laid out before him. "If this were real," Martin said, his voice tight, "there would be a record. In our archives. In corporate memory. This isn't how things work." Elijah's hands rested lightly on the table, fingers interlaced. He spoke without raising his voice. "You think those who buried me left a trail?" Martin scoffed. "Too fast. Mr. Coleman, I'm not accusing you. There's a system, a history to maintain, procedures." "There's also erasure," Elijah replied, eyes unblinking. "And a very practiced silence." A pen rolled off the table and hit the floor with a soft tick. Martin didn't reach for it. He cleared his throat once, then again, too close together. The pen tapping he had been doing earlier stopped altogether, his fingers now locked together in a strained clasp. Heather, unnoticed, took a step back from the table. Her fingers moved across the tablet at her hip. A thought had been forming since yesterday, and now it had weight. She typed into the internal employee search, Grace Lanning. A face appeared. Older, white hair tucked under a navy beret in the photo. Status, retired, 2007. Next to the name, position, Administrative Director, Riverstone Branch. Heather's breath caught, but she didn't pause. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, composing a short message. Need you at Riverstone. Founder may have returned. She hit send, then slipped the device back into her jacket without a sound. Elijah had produced one more sheet. He smoothed it across the table with care, older than the others. The ink had begun to feather at the edges, but the message remained unmistakable. Martin leaned forward, squinting. It was a letter, dated 1952. The signature at the bottom belonged to John Whitmore. The language was precise, legal, unmistakable. No transfer of rights shall be executed without express signature of Elijah Coleman. Below that line, where Elijah's signature should have been, was only blank space. Martin's throat made a dry clicking noise. His eyes darted between the document and Elijah's expressionless face. Outside the room, Stephen stood, arms crossed, watching the glass intently. He didn't move, but one hand drummed lightly against his belt. Inside, the silence thickened. Heather's device buzzed once in her pocket. She pulled it out slowly. On the screen was a single reply from Grace Lanning. Still got the file. Be there in 15. The automatic door slid open, and time seemed to pause. Grace Lanning walked in like the past had finally come calling. Her silhouette cut through the late morning sunlight, framed by the tall glass panels of the entrance. She wore a dark blue coat, buttoned neatly to the collar, her silver hair tucked into a simple twist. In her hand, a large envelope, thick and weathered, swung gently with each step. The room didn't fall silent all at once, but something shifted. A quiet tremor. The way paper stills under a sudden draft. Heather Monroe looked up from her screen. Her heart skipped. Just once. Grace. Heather remembered a line from one of the old training sessions. Something Grace had said while straightening a crooked frame in the break room. Truth has a long memory. Sooner or later, it knocks. Now it had walked through the door. Martin Hale spotted her almost instantly. He stood by the central counter, his posture too straight, his smile too rehearsed. He moved toward her quickly, cutting a clean line through the space, nodding as if greeting an old colleague. But his eyes held urgency, a tightening. Grace, he said, voice low and eager. I didn't expect. She didn't slow. I wasn't asked, she replied. Then her eyes flicked to the left, toward the man standing near the front desk. But I was summoned. Elijah stood calmly, one hand resting on the worn canvas bag at his side. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes followed every movement, every shift in posture, every pause in breath. Grace stopped just in front of him, offering a small smile, genuine, but tempered by the weight of years. I remember you, Mr. Coleman, she said clearly, her voice steady, even musical. You built this place. You hired me when no one else would. From the envelope, she pulled a photograph, black and white, edges curled. She held it up high enough for anyone near the lobby to see. A younger Elijah stood before a brass plaque that read in clean serif, Coleman Trust, Esteleu 1951. He wore a suit too large for his frame, a quiet pride in his shoulders. A ripple moved through the room. It wasn't noise, it was recognition. Near the back, an older man in a tweed coat straightened slightly. I remember that sign, he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. My father opened our first account there. Martin's mask cracked. This proves nothing, he snapped, louder than he meant to. The edge in his voice drew stares, but Elijah didn't raise his voice. He turned, meeting Martin's eyes with calm precision. No, he said, soft but firm. But you do. Every word you haven't said today. That proves everything. A silence spread again, sharper this time, the kind that hums in the background like the build-up before a storm. Even the printer in the back corner paused its soft beeping, as if aware. Stephen Bright stood by the security post, arms crossed. He shifted his weight once, jaw tight, but he didn't speak. Not yet. Heather stepped away from her station. She didn't grab her tablet, didn't check her screen. She walked slowly toward the front desk. Not to work, not to assist. She stood beside Elijah, shoulder just inches from his. Her hands clasped lightly in front of her, eyes forward. She wasn't there to process transactions. She was there to witness. Martin Hale had always ruled from behind his desk. Today, that desk felt like a ledge. The lobby of the Riverstone branch buzzed with attention that hadn't existed even hours ago. The noon sun streamed through the skylights, catching the edges of the brass fixtures and the polished tile floors, reflecting off the phones subtly raised by curious customers who hadn't left, not because they had business, but because they could feel something crumbling. Martin stood beneath the portrait of his father, a younger man with the same jawline and narrowed gaze. The painted eyes seemed to watch everything from above, judging silently, like a warning written in oil on canvas. Elijah Coleman stood a few feet away, quiet, immovable. His canvas bag rested by his foot. He reached into it slowly, methodically, and withdrew a single sheet of yellowed paper. This letter, Elijah said, holding it steady, was written in 1952. John Whitmore confirmed co-ownership in writing. He also confirmed that no transfer would be valid without my sign-off. He turned the letter toward the room, revealing the bold, clear script, and below, a signature line with only one name on it. Martin didn't blink. Forgery, he snapped, but it landed weakly. He stepped forward, sweat beginning to gather at his temples. There's no way to verify. I was there, Grace interrupted. She moved closer, her voice smooth, her tone final. I remember this exact document. I took dictation for Mr. Whitmore that day. I saw him sign it. Elijah never did. Martin opened his mouth, but nothing came. From the far corner, Heather Monroe moved toward the front. Her steps were slow but certain. She didn't look at Martin. Instead, she unpinned her name badge, set it down gently on the marble counter, and turned to face Elijah. I won't be part of this anymore, she said. Not unless we fix it. Silence fell. Then, one by one, other staff followed. No declarations, no raised voices, just the quiet clink of badges hitting marble. A row of them began to form, a line of silent protests laid out like offerings of conscience. Stephen Bright shifted by the security desk. His hand moved toward the radio clipped to his shoulder. Headquarters, he muttered, pressing the button. Riverstone branch. Escalation possible. Only static replied. He tried again. Nothing. Then a faint click. The radio was on, but no voice returned. Just silence. Observing. Listening. Across the floor, the sun moved slowly, hitting the wall near the entrance. A glare bounced off the modern plaque that read Whitmore Financial. Heather glanced up, watching as the metal glint shifted, and for a moment revealed what lay behind it, the faint imprint of an older engraving. Coleman Trust. The past still there beneath the polish. Martin turned to Elijah one last time. His voice was lower now, absent of confidence. What do you want from me? Elijah met his gaze with calm gravity. You've run this place, but it was never yours. I'm not asking for vengeance. I'm asking for truth. And that means you step aside. A long silence followed. The only sound was the soft hum of the HVAC system and the distant buzz of a phone on vibrate. Martin stared down at his own badge. Slowly, without drama, he unpinned it. His hand hovered for a moment, then set it gently beside the others. He didn't look back as he walked away. Stephen's eyes followed him until the door closed behind him. Then his gaze shifted toward the exit. His hand hovered near his belt, twitching slightly. Not in aggression, but uncertainty. He didn't move. Not yet. Elijah didn't ask for applause. But when he turned toward the door, the silence felt louder than any ovation. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long golden rectangles across the marble floor. Time moved slowly now, as if reluctant to interrupt the moment. The modern nameplate that once declared Whitmore Financial lay face down on a side table, its screws still warm from removal. In its place, high above the central lobby, the old bronze plaque gleamed with quiet authority. Coleman Trust, its Dever 1951. Elijah stood in front of it for a moment, not in awe, not in mourning, just in recognition. Heather stepped up beside him, her hands lightly clasped. "Will you stay?" she asked, her voice soft enough not to echo. Elijah's smile barely curved. "My name already will." Behind them, Grace Lanning watched with folded arms, her expression somewhere between pride and release. "I've waited decades for this moment," she murmured. Elijah gave her a gentle nod. "So have I." He picked up his canvas bag, lighter now, though its contents had not changed. The weight it once carried had shifted, no longer burdened by disbelief or memory, but upheld by witness. He began to walk. The rows of tellers and desks, once cold and procedural, now lined his path like markers in a story being rewritten. One by one, employees stood, not in salute, not as protest, but in silent acknowledgement. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Customers moved aside without prompt, creating a quiet aisle from the heart of the lobby to the double-glass doors. Respect, once withheld, unfolded like breath. Some of them nodded. One woman placed a hand over her chest. A young man lowered his phone, not to record, but to simply watch. Stephen Bright stood near the security post. He didn't move forward, didn't speak. His stance was looser now, his arms no longer crossed. The radio at his side had gone quiet hours ago. His eyes followed Elijah not with suspicion, but something that looked almost like searching. Elijah passed each face with stillness. A slight dip of the head here, a glance of acknowledgement there. No fanfare, just presence. At the threshold, he stopped. His hand touched the cool metal of the door's handle, but he didn't push. Instead, he turned back once more. The afternoon light hit the polished plaque squarely, illuminating the name that had survived erasure. He looked at it, took a deep breath, then let it out slowly. "That's enough," he said. And then he stepped outside, into a world that had finally remembered him. A few weeks later, mounted just inside the bank's entrance, where every visitor could see it before they stepped further in, was a new brass plaque. Its engraving read, "In honor of Elijah Coleman, founder-believer, unforgotten." The light, streaming through the tall windows, caught the bronze plaque just right, casting a glow that seemed to honor not just a man, but a memory long denied. Elijah's quiet walk out of the bank wasn't a victory parade. It was a return to the place history tried to erase him from. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it arrives in worn canvas, steady footsteps, and a truth that refuses to stay buried. This was never just about a building. It was about who gets to be remembered and who decides. If this story moved you, consider sharing it with someone who's ever been told they don't belong, because sometimes the most powerful legacy is simply being seen.